Hi everyone, this is Takeshi from the University of Tokyo and Riken, Japan. In this video clip, I'm introducing our paper, Few-Shot Domain Adaptation by Causal Mechanism Transfer. The goal of this work is domain adaptation. What is domain adaptation? It's an approach to enable small data learning by using some additional datasets which are related to but different from your own data. The central question in this problem setting is when is it possible? In other words, what do we assume on the relations of the datasets? To provide one possible answer to these questions, we focus on the concept of causal mechanisms behind the data distributions and consider the case that the different datasets share a common causal mechanism. Technically, we consider so-called structural causal models and assume that the set of structural equations is invariant across different domains. And in this setting, we proposed how to exploit the assumption for domain adaptation, conducted solid theoretical analysis for the method, and performed a proof of concept experiment to confirm its validity. So in a nutshell, our message is that a common data generating mechanism, such as causality, can be exploited for domain adaptation. Now, let me briefly explain the intuition behind our approach to exploit causality. The intuition is simple. We, as human beings, care about finding causal knowledge. And that's partly because the causal knowledge is portable. It can be used in many different systems once it's acquired. Let's consider an imaginary scenario where you want to predict a disease risk based on medical records. Say you want to focus on a certain region of the globe where you have only limited amount of data. You may want to reuse the data from other regions. However, the data distributions may appear different because of different lifestyles, dietary habits, etc. So they cannot be directly used for training your own predictor. Our approach aims to open up the possibility to use such data from the different regions. If you can safely assume that the pathological mechanisms are invariant across the domains. Now, with our approach, we have a means to directly implement this belief of invariant causal mechanisms in order to perform domain adaptation. Now, let me go into the details. I'm Takeshi Teshima, and this is joint work with Professor Issei Sato and Professor Masashi Sugiyama. First, I will introduce some preliminaries. In this work, we consider so-called structure equation models. It's a model of the data generating process where the joint distribution of the data is expressed by a set of deterministic functions called structure equations, and the distribution of independent latent factors. And in this model, each variable in your data, say x2, is assumed to be determined by its corresponding function, which takes the values of some of the variables called the parents of x2, and also hidden factors corresponding to each variable. So this is the form of the causal model that we assume to exist behind the data distributions. And in our work, instead of directly dealing with the structure equations, we estimate what's called the reduced form. The reduced form is the set of equations determined by solving the structure equations so that the left-hand side has only observed variables and the right-hand side has only the latent variables. Such a transformation from the original structure equations to their reduced form is always possible when the structure equation model is said acyclic. What's important about this form is that we can actually estimate the reduced form function, here denoted by f, by using nonlinear independent component analysis methods, given certain identification conditions. And we will use this fact in our algorithm later. Now I will explain our problem formulation. We focus on a regression domain adaptation problem where all the data sets appear in the same data space. We also assume that we have labeled data from multiple source domains, and we have lots of them. And also that we have few but labeled target domain data. Given these data, the goal is to make an accurate predictor for the target domain data distribution. And in each domain, we assume that there exists a causal mechanism. Here, we formulated it in a little more general way than normal structure equation models. We assume that the data follows a nonlinear-ICA data generating model. which corresponds to assuming the existence of a reduced form model of structure equation models. So each domain distribution consists of a function f and a distribution of the independent components q. And what we assume is that the data we observe, x and y, is generated in two steps. First, independent components are sampled from q, and then they are transformed into the joint data of x and y by applying an invertible function f. So we have this assumption for each domain. Now we explain our key assumption, the shared generative mechanism. The assumption is that the f representing the data generation process in the previous slide is common across all domains. This is our assumption on the relations among the different domains. Even under this assumption, that each of these q can be arbitrarily different, so that the different domains can still have very different distributions on the surface. Next, I will explain how to exploit the assumptions for domain adaptation. Our proposed method goes on like this. First, we estimate f using the source domain data, because that is essentially the only commonality that is assumed about the relations of the domains. We can realize this step by Nonlinear-ICA. Now please look at the figure. Now that we have estimated f, we can use it to extract the independent components from the labeled target domain data, as in the first two figures. After we do that, we reshuffle the estimated independent components. For example, if the data is two-dimensional, as in the figure, we take all the grid points, which are expressed as the crosses. And in the next step, we treat each of these grid points as candidate independent components. And we apply the estimated f again, so that we can obtain pseudo-target data point from each possible candidate of independent components. Finally, we use all the generated pseudo-target data to fit the predictor model of your choice. Now the question is, how does this procedure help? The data seems to be enumerated, but what does it mean to do that, statistically speaking? To investigate this question, we provide two theoretical analyses in the paper based on the theory of U and V statistics. The first theorem explains that the proposed method should help in terms of variance. Formally, the theorem states that the empirical risk calculated from the pseudo data should have the minimum variance among all possible unbiased risk estimators if we perfectly estimated f. Of course, the estimation of f is almost never perfect because we are estimating it. In this case, a trade-off appears. We capture the trade-off in the form of a generalization error bond in the second theorem. For its details, please see the paper, but we can interpret the theorem as follows. The inflated data allows us to fit more expressive predictors by reducing the fear of overfitting. However, if our estimation of f is highly inaccurate, then the pseudo data appears in very wrong locations, introducing bias in the risk estimator. Finally, I will explain the proof of concept experiment. In this experiment, we borrowed a dataset from an econometrics textbook for which structure equation models have been applied. We compared our proposed method with some standard baselines. And for detailed figures, please take a look at our paper. But here, a summarized message is that the proposed method successfully improves the performance of the predictor compared to naive training only using the few target domain data. And we see such improvements in the cases where other methods suffer from the negative transfer. To sum up, we explored the transfer assumption of shared generative mechanism and developed a few-shot domain adaptation method for regression in this setting. The method extracts and uses the hidden causal model and directly exploits the knowledge to perform data augmentation, which reduces overfitting. And the validity of the procedure has been confirmed by solid theoretical analysis and the proof of concept experiment. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and I would appreciate any feedback.